So welcome everybody. This is SharePoint Patterns and Practices or SharePoint Dev ecosystem or SharePoint Dev community September 2018 monthly community call. And this is the September, like I said, September 11th is today, and this is the monthly community call where we're going to go through what has, well, in high level happened within past month. So technically today we have 3 different demos. So we're going to concentrate absolutely on the demo side, and we're slightly adjusting the messaging around this monthly summaries and monthly call as well, because I think it's technically people are more interested on seeing live demos and having a discussion on what's actually happening and what's the new stuff rather than looking back on what has happened. Because looking back, you can always go to our blog posts and you always see what's available from there. So we're kind of slightly adjusting to this be slightly more forward thinking and concentrate on the demos more and more. Now, no idea what Ralph is talking there. So I'm kind of trying to follow up on what's happening in the IO window, but let's see how this actually goes. Now, today, a few SharePoint development news topics. So talk about certain things. I still have a user voice update over there. I think I might have a slide on the user voice update, but we don't actually have that much progress on the user voice or any, let's say, massive new things, announcements in here, because the Ignite is within the 2 weeks, and obviously we'll keep some of our announcements waiting so that there will be announcement in the Ignite timeframe. Let's talk about that one in a second. So we'll also have 3 different demos. So I will start by having it helps if I would update the slide. So I'm not going to have a preview on SharePoint Framework 1.6. It is actually out. So I'm going to actually demonstrate you a really cool end-to-end centralized deployment of a footer, which is reusable and configurable, which is available for you today already as part of the September release of stuff. Now, and I'm going to explain how it actually works and how you can configure a centralized, from a centralized location, a standardized footer for your tenant, if that's something what you're looking into doing within your deployment. Also, it is open source and everything is available, and it takes advantage of the tenant-wide deployment. Now, after me, Andrew Connell is going to talk about Angular elements with SharePoint Framework. So Andrew has a really great series, a blog post series, which is relatively new, and he's going to explain what does it mean to take advantage of Angular elements. And I can imagine that there's some future-driven discussion there as well, because Google or Angular team is readying up the following version of Angular, which seems to be looking extremely interesting. So that's a super interesting topic as well. And then the Stefan Power on the end is going to do a live demo on our new open source Yeoman template project, which is going to be announced today. So basically, well, I don't have a slide for that, but I'm announcing it today, and Stefan's going to show that one in practice. The whole point of that one is that we can actually now start building together custom templates on a JavaScript frameworks, which are not natively supported in the out-of-the-box Yeoman. Sounds slightly tricky, but Stefan's going to walk through the process, and then I'm going to actually talk about what does it mean in practice and why. Well, potentially we might open source the out-of-the-box one at some point, but for now, for time being, we don't actually do that. So we're introducing a new side-by-side out-of-the-box open source project to support this. So let's see how that goes. But Stefan's going to show that one in practice. Now, let's go through some of the slides. So I'm going to be intentionally quite fast on some of the slides. And like I said, I've dropped some of the content, which we typically go through on the monthly communication call to avoid that we're taking too much time. First of all, just quickly explaining what this is all about. So we have quite a lot of call. We have quite a lot of community things and dev on the SharePoint dev side. So the whole point of that one is that you can decide which of these you actually want to show, how do you want to actually engage together with community. So we have the SharePoint Developer group in the Microsoft Tech community. We have bi-weekly SharePoint Framework community calls, where we actually concentrate on what is a SharePoint Framework and SharePoint Framework demos, and only SharePoint Framework and JavaScript-driven development. Then we have a general SharePoint Dev call, which is meeting bi-weekly as well, which is then concentrating more on, let's say, site designs and provisioning and column formatting and all of those things. So everything which is not related on SharePoint Framework, because, well, let's face it, SharePoint platform is quite big, and there's quite a lot of topics and quite a lot of ways of customizing SharePoint. So we want to make sure that there's two different, so to say, focus groups on these topics. And then we have this monthly community call, which is kind of a once a month walking through what has happened. This typically is right after we released our monthly summary, where we actually acknowledge the people who've been working with us within the past month. Now, a few numbers and few, let's say, numbers on this, what has happened. Let's see if I can actually slightly adjust certain things on my slides. There we go. Now I can actually see the slides much better. And so in here, this is just a show you some level of a numbers if you're wondering if is there any other people out there. So sure, within this call, we're already hitting 139, 141 participants. I think our record was 230 or something like that on spring, and then the whole Skype went down. So that wasn't super successful. Now, 150 we can probably do properly. Now, there's obviously a lot of activities what's happening in the SharePoint Dev community. So in our YouTube channel, we had a 187,000 minutes watch time within the last month. So clearly people are appreciating recording of these calls and then looking into what's happening. In a GitHub, we had close to 50,000 unique visitors in the past 2 weeks, which is pretty cool as well, which was 245,000 views. So there's a lot of other people looking into using this stuff as well. In the docs, we went slightly itsy bitsy down from July, which is actually as expected because there's a summer vacation time in Europe during August as well. And we were in 880,000 views. The PnP reusable component, so this is the open source part of things, which we've been using for years already. The usage of this one is growing, so the PnP PowerShell, PnP Sesame Core, and PnP JS, which is the JavaScript layer of things. So there was 17,000 unique tenants actually using PnP reusable components, which generated altogether 12.6 billion requests. And you don't actually, it's really hard to figure out what is a 12.6 billion requests, but it means that through these components, the PnP Sesame and PnP PowerShell and PnP JS and PnP JavaScript component, we're getting more than 4,700 requests per second all around the world. And that will give you a scale of the open source inside of the SharePoint Online as well. And that's pretty mind-blowing. And obviously on top of this, there's the on-premises side of the story as well. So SharePoint is huge and SharePoint usage is growing quite significantly. Now, good example of the growth. Again, we can't actually show you the numbers in here, but I can give you the scale, is the adoption of SharePoint Framework. And this is really mind-blowing. We grew 240% on the usage of SharePoint Framework from January 2018. And already at the January 2018, SharePoint Framework was the widest and most widely used extensibility model in the whole Office 365. So the usage is just growing insane. To be honest, everybody is like, well, are these numbers correct? And then we double check the numbers and they are correct. And it's just great to see the adoption. And it's great to see that when we're introducing new capabilities like SharePoint Framework 1.6, people are adapting those capabilities quite fast and start using them, because that is absolutely our intention, giving you capabilities which you can use together with your customers and partners. Now, documentation, a few slides as a reminder on this one. AKMS SP Dev Docs is the location on docs.microsoft.com/SharePoint. The official documentation is here. There's a lot of new articles, a lot of new updates, which we did last week. Last week, that is pretty precise, as part of the 1.6 release. And also there was a new articles related on the SharePoint Framework usage. We also refreshed all of our tutorials, which is a big thing. So if you're not super familiar with SharePoint Framework development, the tutorials are updated, videos are updated, and everything should be up to date already, matching the versions which are available for you to take advantage. The second thing, if you're running into dev issues or potential bug in the service or whatever, please let us know. We are significantly falling behind of this issue list. We are now making clear actions to how to catch up this issue list. But the whole point of this one is that you will have a channel to report issues on the underlying APIs or customizations, or if you think there's a problem, or if you want to have a discussion with somebody else on the community, you have a clear one location where you can actually do that. And that's the SP DevDocs issue list. You can get there AKMS SP Dev issues or SP DevDocs repository in the GitHub. Now, and like I said, we are now catching up on this one quite heavily. We've been falling behind due to numerous reasons, and Ignite is, to be honest, messing up our schedules pretty significantly, and that always happens every single year, but it's just, there's no way for getting prepared for that. Now, on the Ignite, so just a quick reminder on that one, we actually have a lot of SharePoint Developer Platform content in Ignite. At some point, this was slightly awkward. Whenever the Ignite catalog went live, there was none. And actually, some people were like super worried on what does it actually mean? Why isn't there any SharePoint Developer Platform content? And that was because we had a small delay on getting all of the content and topics finalized, but now there's like at least three to four actual big breakout sessions. There's like 4 different theater sessions. We have a PMP and SharePoint Framework booths. We have a SharePoint Craft booth, and everything is available in Ignite. So there is a blog post in the developermicrosoft.com/SharePoint, where you can actually find all of the breakout sessions and all of the details, what's happening within the Ignite site. Ignite is within 1.5 weeks. Horrifying. We're running out of time quickly. Now, what else? One thing what I wanted to remind, if you're interested on following up on things, and this is something what we also want to have feedback. Also, you can provide us feedback on social media or during these calls or any way you prefer. So we started this new series called SharePoint Dev Weekly, and this is really meant to be a discussion between me, Waldek, and then a visitor. On the last one, we had AC and Drew Connell dropping by, and we've had a basically discussion on different topics. What's the latest articles and samples and tooling, what has been released within the past week. So we typically record these on Thursdays, and the video goes live on Friday. So it's relatively fresh content. We are debating actually slightly adjusting the schedule, but more details on that one. So it might be that in future we'd actually record on Monday and push this one out on Tuesday. Now, if you're interested in following up, what is the latest articles, what is the latest samples and all of that, and the video is there for you to take advantage. And there's a blog post which is referencing all of the assets and articles as well. If you write an article or a sample, or you want to get covered in here, please tag or send us a message in social media using the hashtag SPDevWeekly or in Twitter, so we actually are able to then acknowledge or notice that your content is available. And this is just to ensure that we will be aware the awesome stuff what you're actually building, and then we're able to have a discussion on that one in the call as well. Good. Few more things before we go to the actual demo section. First of all, SharePoint Framework 1.6 went live. So if you missed this one last week, just making sure that everybody is aware of this. This was a big release for us. So now we have a native Microsoft Graph support in SharePoint Framework. So you can actually centrally control what are the scopes and APIs which the SharePoint Framework components can actually call from Microsoft Graph. There's a secure way of calling third-party APIs. This is really the holy grail of SharePoint development in SharePoint Online, because you can securely call a web API in Azure, which you can then, for example, expose your line of business data to SharePoint Online UIs and all of that. So it brings such a humongous amount of opportunities. And then a really big thing is the tenant-wide deployment of extensions. And I'll show you that one in practice. But from a centralized location, you can enable the SharePoint Framework extensions on the existing sites. And what it means is that you can, as an example, push footers or headers or navigation items or whatever elements to all of the sites from a single location. So you don't actually have to explicitly install the extensions in every single site. You can easily do this from a one centralized location. And that's huge. That's going to help enormously for people to take advantage of SharePoint Framework. And I'll show you that one in a practice after a few slides. Quick reminders on the roadmap and the dev roadmap. So obviously 1.6 was live is from last week. We're not going to release a new version in 2 weeks, so that's kind of understandable. Hopefully, we're not that fast. But the ETA for 1.7 is now October 2018. We're really targeting that to happen on October, by end of October 2018, and then we're releasing few capabilities which community and customers are asking quite a lot. Also to new capabilities to preview. So for example, the preview of SharePoint Framework built Microsoft Teams tab is coming with 1.7, and also preview of Microsoft Teams applications in SharePoint Online. So we're kind of aligning the development experience within the Microsoft Teams. The SharePoint do also obvious reasons. So SharePoint Framework is adapted so fast and the usage is growing that it makes sense to start growing the usage of or reach of SharePoint Framework also outside of the SharePoint as well. And a few other things obviously coming on the 1.7 from a SharePoint Framework perspective. Then there will be a lot of announcements on branding, list views, column views, site designs, functionality perspective on the SharePoint side in the Ignite, which I can't go to too much detail in here. But if you follow up on the tech community blog posts and the SharePoint social media messaging, you can absolutely follow up on what's happening. All of the Ignite sessions are also recorded, so you can easily follow up on the recordings, I think day after the session has happened. Well, there might have been actually a message that they're live streamed, which is pretty cool as well. Now, moving on things, and I do apologize. I'm slightly rushing because I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for the demos as well. So first of all, thank you everybody for your assistance within the last month. I do apologize, the size of the name is getting smaller and smaller on the slides, and that's because we're getting more and more people actively participating on the SharePoint Dev community. So contributing by having a demo in the community calls, or contributing by editing or contributing a sample, or contributing by having a submission towards the SharePoint developer documentation. These are really simple things to do. If you, as an example, find a typo in the existing documentation, there is an edit button on the page in the docs.microsoft.com, and you're able to actually contribute back. But thank you everybody for your help on making this the best and the most active community out there, at least from our perspective. I don't think we really want to compare the stats between others, but I know that we are actually definitely, if we're not the most active, definitely one of the most active ones in the Microsoft Cloud. So thank you everybody for your assistance on this. Now, SPA HTTP client batch should be in release mode, but I need to confirm that one on the question. Now, also the companies who contributed, or these are the companies which we have a name, which we have a permission to show in the slide. So these are companies which allow their employees to work on the open source community, so contributing back for those people which they learned from, or contributing back to those projects and programs which they actually use on the day-to-day basis. And thank you also from behalf of Microsoft for these companies to let their employees to actually openly contribute back in a GitHub and in our open source channels. So thank you for that. Cool. On the Microsoft side, the list is growing. Well, it's a live list, obviously. There's certain people who are here in every single month, like me, but there are certain people who then pop in depending on the contributions as well. So there's few new people again on the list, which is great to see also from an internal Microsoft community side. But let's actually get to the demos as well. Not too bad, 19 minutes, and I do apologize for speaking super fast. Cool, so we have 3 demos. I want to do a preview. It would help if I would update the slides, actually. It's not a preview of SharePoint Framework 1.6. It is 1.6 is out, so I'm going to show you the global footer, which you can take advantage today in the SharePoint in your tenants, and the code is available and it's open source, and you can use it any way you want. So let me show this one in practice, and then we'll get the Andrew and Stefan after that. So let me actually share my screen. And one of these 4 screens is the one which I should be sharing. It's that one. There's a question from Daniel, is this a non-floaty footer? Answer is no. Right now, all of the footers are floating footers. And let me actually open that one as well. And what we want to do, screen sharing is probably now working, right? Somebody has to confirm that it's fine. Yes, cool. On Daniel's question around the non-floating footers, we are looking into having additional placeholders, including the non-floating footer, but I can't give you a timeline right now for that. Cool. So 1.6 SharePoint framework, it didn't only provide new packages in NPM, it actually also had an underlying server-side updates, and one of those things is the tenant-wide deployment. So if we extend SharePoint Framework into DevDocs and extensions, we can actually find details around the tenant-wide deployment. So this contains all of the details around how do you actually take advantage of it, what does it actually mean, how you filter the extensions to a specific site and all of that. And this, well, we could actually modify slightly the formatting of this one, but that's a separate discussion, and it goes to the details on the solution structure as well. Now, let me actually explain and show this one in practice. So what I've done here is that I'm taking advantage of this global footer solution, which is available in the GitHub as an open source solution. This is actually implemented by Waldeck, even though it chose the last edit by me. That's because I did a small edit here, but Waldeck Mastercard implemented this one for you to take advantage. And the cool thing about this one is that we intentionally actually included also the SPFx file here, so you don't have to even have source code. So you don't have to compile, you don't have to install anything. You can just take the SPFx file and take that into a use. So if you want to do that, if you want to test it in your test tenant, you can just go to the SharePoint folder, solution folder, and you can download the SPFx file from here. Now, in my case, I've actually done that already. So here's my SPFx file, which is precisely that file from internet. And now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to actually install that to my tenant. So, but let's actually have a look on quickly on the tenant before I do that. So let's go to a random group site. And you can see that this is a random group associated team site, so it's a modern team site, and there's no special functionalities available here. Let me actually add another one here. So let me go to a communication site. Adjust that one there, and we can actually see that there's no special functionalities available, except there's a funny, apparently a funny logo on the site, but that's the only thing what we have done here. Now, in this case, what I want to do is that I want to install the solution to our application catalog. And this is really the key related on SharePoint Framework. So we have a centralized control. We have a governance for and enabling customization so that there's no rogue customization, no ad hoc script injection fears or any security issues like that. So a person has to have the right permissions to install the solution to the app catalog. And in the app catalog, when we install the solution, we're showing something slightly new. This is part of now the 1.6 release. So I'm going to zoom in. First of all, we're showing that we can actually host these assets from SharePoint Online. This means that we're taking advantage of Office 365 CDN and asset packaging. That's in 1.4.1 release, 1.4 release of SharePoint Framework, so nothing new. That's a tenant scope deployment, which basically means that I'm enabling the tenant solution in a tenant level. Now, with extension, with web parts, this is actually the only thing what you need to do, that click that checkbox and the web part is available in the web part picker. Now, in the extension case, there is no such thing as extension picker. So you need to still explicitly install the extension to a site to actually make that work, or enable that in the site level, even though you deploy that in a tenant scope level, which is slightly confusing, but that's where we actually now introduce the tenant-wide deployment support. So in this case, this solution contains an extension which will be automatically enabled across the sites. And this is a good reminder That, in this case, especially as an example, this JavaScript will be automatically then activated in the whole tenant when it's actually activated on the site. So app catalog means that you are deploying a solution to your tenant. So obviously it's a good practice to first test a random solution file in some other tenants rather than in your production, just a bit of a warning. But basically what we're doing is that we're adding an entry on this tenant-wide extension list, which is an app catalog site collection. And let's see what that means in practice. So I'm going to enable this in tenant scope. And that's now available. So that's now deployed. It's tenant deployed, and everything is happening by default. Now, right now, the tenant-wide deployment, let's say the admin experience isn't quite optimal, but we're potentially looking into providing a nice UIs in the central admin at some point for this one, or the tenant admin. But as part of that package, we actually added an entry to this tenant-wide extension list. And what it means is that this entry right now doesn't have any filterings. It doesn't have any other things that it actually is saying that, hey, component ID is following, and then the component has properties. So now what it means is that if I go to any site within my tenant, we actually light up that component because that's what the solution actually contained. And we have a standardized footer available for all of the sites, new sites, existing sites. It doesn't really matter. The extension is automatically available within the sites. In this case, this is a relatively small footer. It has 3 buttons which you can click. You can hopefully see that small reaction there. And then it has a standard text, which is sharing is caring, Contoso sharing is caring. Now, relatively simple scenario, but this is quite often actually what customers want. And in this case, obviously, because we didn't have any filtering, if I refresh a communication site or if I create a new communication site, it actually has the same setting and same configuration inside in here. Now, we can actually do something else as well. So we can actually filter this. So let me actually, first of all, take a small modification in here. So I'm going to actually modify the entry slightly. So let me actually modify that. There's a small, it's a bit interesting encoding in here, but I'm going to actually paste in the updated value, which I had from a Visual Studio Code. So just explaining, I'm taking a entry from a Visual Studio Code from another screen. And in here, I'm actually very able to see that I'm updating label to be, let's say, Litware Electronics. Sharing is caring, and let's say the explanation mark there as well. Where is it? I have a keyboard which doesn't actually have, where is the explanation mark? It's actually over there. I'm still learning from Scandinavian keyboard to the US international keyboard layout, so that long story, I'm not going to explain that. Now, we're adding here a few new entries. We're adding here the Litware Electronics, and voila, saving that one, stop editing. Actually, let's do one more edit here. Let's actually only target this one to a specific template. So I'm going to go to our documentation. I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to actually associate this extension only to group associated team sites. So let's go back on the list. Let's add a filter on that one, and let's stop editing the entry. Ta-da! Everything is fine. Let's go to group site, refresh. What's going to happen? It is no longer Contoso Electronics. It is Litware Electronics. And you can actually see the new entry and there, and it has the updated values. Now, same time, because we added the filter based on the template, the extension is no longer in the communication site level at all, because we basically filter and we say that this is only to be applied on the group side. You can do that if you want. You don't have to do that if you don't want. Let me add here one more entry. So I'm going to actually let me actually do following. So just to copy the values. So I'm going to actually copy the values from here. I'm going to slightly modify the entry for communication side to complete the demo. I'm not going to deep dive on the code because it doesn't really, in this case, it doesn't really make that much sense. I'm going to copy the JSON file. Code is available for you today from Visual Studio, from GitHub. You can download the code. You can take advantage of that one. I'm gonna still one more thing. Let's see. I'm gonna target this one to a communication site. So let's actually copy that one. The tenant-wide extension. Target this configuration to communication site. I could actually target, if I'm actually creating a list view comment set, I can actually add this one to be in a separate for separate list as well. There's a question related from Todd, can I add in multiple entries here? If I remember correctly, the code behind of this, the answer is no. It is actually filtering based on the web template, but you can absolutely add multiple lines of rows. But you can also, if you have a list view comment set, so basically you want to have buttons for all of the document libraries or lists, which will then activate and run code, you can actually target your list view comment sets using the list template as well. So I can actually do 101 here, which would then mean that if it's a list view comment set, it would only activate on a document library. In this case, we're talking about a footer implementation. So that's not what I want to do. I'm going to take the location entry. I'm going to put this one in the location entry and save it in the list. So now we have one configuration for communication side, one configuration for group associated team side. They are both application customizers, so it's an application customizer entry. So let's actually go and just proving you that it is actually rendering that. If I go here, there's my new entry, and you can actually see that it has now 4 or 5 actually buttons, and it's now saying Contoso Electronics in this side. But if I go to the group side and filter the group side, it still has the 3 different buttons available, and it still says Litware Electronics. And obviously, just to make sure that everybody gets this is on runtime happening in your tenant. So if I create a new site, let's create a communication site, doesn't really matter. Monthly call demo. Let's create a communication site. They are pretty fast to actually create. So let's use the showcase. That looks good. Click a finish. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Right about now, we have a site created, and we can see that the communication site footer is available here. And you could absolutely configure the target of these buttons. Right now, these are pointing, if I go back on the list, they're pointing to a relative paths which do not exist within this tenant, so I'm not going to even click the buttons, but basically you could configure them related on your tenant. Todd is asking, is the data in tenant-wide extension cached or loaded every time a page is rendered? So it is technically cached, but whenever there's a change in the tenant-wide list, we are refreshing the cache. So this way, basically, it is caching in the right way, so to say. So it works in the right way. There's no delays. If you do a modification, your changes are immediately available within the sites, which is super, super cool. There was one thing what I was meant to say, but maybe we'll talk about this one absolutely later. Oh yes, the one thing what I wanted to still pinpoint. Okay, obviously in this case, still this is relatively rough from the admin perspective. Obviously the developer can define if they want these kind of solutions to be available. Or if they want this kind of automation to be available within their solution. So let me quickly. This is only going to take 1 second. SP Dev Solutions. I restarted my machine just before the call, just in case, to avoid any issues with the Skype. So here we go. So here is my Visual Studio code. So the developer in this case is actually defining the automation which will be applied whenever we actually install the solution to the tenant. In the real world, in the future, we are potentially looking into having a nice administrative UI where the admin can go and see, oh, what kind of components do I have available? And then check. And from a drop down, then target the template for a specific templates or a specific lists and all of that. So right now, using this kind of a list-based configuration is relatively rough, but obviously it already works. So, and then potentially in the future, if there's a high interest by the administrators for this to make it more simpler, we can absolutely expose this kind of a functionality also in the modern admin UI. And yes, absolutely good example is the SharePoint Starter Kit. So SharePoint Starter Kit has a portal footer and the collab footer, and collab footer is a perfect sample for this one. This is intentionally slightly more simplified because the collab footer actually has a dependency on a user profile property, which you cannot automate to get created on a tenant. So this global footer which is completely configurable by anybody and reusable by anybody just by configuring the URL entries in here, is a good example how to make these things happen. Cool, but that's all on my side. I think it's time to flip to AC on this one, and I will check if I missed any questions as AC starts presenting.
Hey, just making sure you can hear me, Vesa.
All good, loud and clear.
All right, let me share my screen. And if you would let me know when you can see my screen.
Of course.
Should be a browser.
It is loading. David got it, and
cool.
I got it as well. Okay.
Okay. Awesome. So thanks a lot for giving me a chance to show this. So let me just give everybody just a quick heads up on this. So I'm not able to watch the chat as I'm doing this little presentation here. So if you have a question specifically for me, if you just do an @AC on your question when I'm done, and Stefan's presenting, I'll go back and look at the questions then and answer them then. So what do I want to show here? I've got a link up here for a blog, just to give you a chance to grab it if you want. I've got a 4-part blog series that I posted last week about the topic that I'm going to demo on. And let me just really quickly set the stage if you on what you're going to see here. Since the SharePoint framework came out, a lot of people who had experience using Angular had expressed some, they wanted to be able to continue using those Angular skills when they're building SharePoint framework projects. And by default, Microsoft is, I don't want to say they support any web frameworks because they really don't. They really are agnostic as far as the SharePoint framework is concerned. Let's just say that React is one that they're just a little more embracing of because that's the one that they use for all their stuff, and they give us access to all the components that they use. But there's absolutely nothing the SharePoint engineering team has done to make it harder for us to use Angular inside the SharePoint framework. Really, the challenges that we've had with using Angular in the SharePoint framework is all rooted in how Angular is engineered. So it's nothing to do with the SharePoint framework, and there's honestly nothing that Microsoft can do to make this easier for us. So there's really been, up until May, we had one option, which is to build an Angular application. And when I say Angular, I'm meaning like the current versions of Angular. So Angular 2 or 4 or 5 or 6. So what you could do is there's blog posts that show you how to do this, about how to build an Angular application and then load that or host it inside of a web part. The challenge with that is that the thing that Angular wants is that it needs to it has this concept of one component on the page, or one root level component on the page, that Angular looks to be the bootstrapper for everything else Angular on the page. So the challenge, when we're building a normal website or a normal web app, that's not a big deal because as a developer, we own everything on the page. But in SharePoint, or what I like to refer to this as a composable page, one that as a developer, I can build something, but there's no telling what's going to be on the page where my component's going to go. Vesa could be adding other web parts on the page. And the challenge with that is that if I have 2 Angular web parts that are going to be on the page, well, I no longer have this one top level component that can orchestrate the bootstrapping of everybody else on the page. There's a couple little tips and tricks that people have come up with on how to do this dynamically. But the challenge in doing this dynamically is that we can't take advantage of some of the performance stuff. And so what Angular did is back in May, when they released Angular 6, they introduced a new concept called Angular Elements. And what this is a way to use Angular to write something called a web component, or more specifically, a custom element. And what that is a web standards-based way of building custom tags. So you're familiar in HTML with things like an input tag or a button. Those are just HTML tags. All a custom element is it's just a piece of JavaScript that registers itself into the native API in the browsers that support this concept, and those that don't have polyfills to fix this. And you then can just use your component on the page. So, for example, just to show you how it looks like, I could write a component that is called the Microsoft Cloud Show and would render out or know how to work with this component and know how to deal with the properties coming in as well as with the event. What Angular Elements does is it gives us the ability to do this. So let me show you how to do this. So there's a couple different ways you can do it, or there's really 2 options of how you can do this. One option is to create a SharePoint framework project using the Yeoman SharePoint framework generator. And I'm not going to go through doing this. I'm just going to show you this. If you want the code, go to my blog post. There's and one or two of the posts, there's a place where you can download a zip file with all of the code in here that you can grab access to. But what you see here, if I created a standard SharePoint framework project, so you can see all the SharePoint frameworky stuff up here, and there's your Hello World web part. And what I did is I then went through and I added all the stuff to my project, so specifically all the NPM packages that are needed for Angular. So that's the stuff that I've highlighted up here. And then there's a couple other things, actually these three guys down here are Angular-y kind of things as well. And manually add that stuff. And then you have to go make another change to your gulp file where you add in all of the stuff you see that I have highlighted right here. And what this is effectively doing is it's telling the gulp task when you're building the project, it's telling it that when it needs to go through and not only also build stuff for Angular in a certain way, but it also tells it of things that needs to get sucked into the bundle for this component to work. So I'm doing this all in one single project. So I call this option one, the big omnibus project. So here I've got my Angular application. So it's got my top level Angular module that I've created. And then I have my component that I've created as well. And so in this component here, all I have is just a div that's going to write a message that's being passed in, that you can see here is an input parameter. And then I have an input tag and a button that's going to raise an event called the element button click. And so when I click this button, it's going to fire this event that you see down here, and then that's going to emit a message back. All right. Now, how do we handle this, or how do I go about making this what's called an Angular element or a custom element? Well, the way that that's done is in an Angular is that you import this thing called the create custom element, and usually you would see a bootstrap option right here on the ng module. You're going to get rid of that and instead replace it with entry components. And then down here in this method called do bootstrap, what this is going to do is this is going to check to see, is there already an HTML tag in the browser that's been registered called app hello world? And if there's not, we're going to create one, and then we're going to create an instance of our component, and then as a custom element, and then we're going to tell custom elements.define, that's going to tell the browser, hey, this tag is really associated with this JavaScript class. So how do I use that? Well, if I come over here back into my web part, what you see here is I'm doing a few things. I'm going to import it right here, and I'll explain some stuff above it in just a minute. I'm going to import it right here, and then in the render method, I have to tell it that I want to use this platform browser dynamic. That's coming from Angular, and it's telling it how to bootstrap the application because it can't self-bootstrap itself for various reasons of how the thing is built. And then I'm simply going to say, let's write out our new custom tag. You see here, I'm assigning the message property equal to the description that's being passed in, which is a property on our web part. And then I'm going to get a reference to that element and just add to the page. And then I'm going to add an event listener so I can see what happens. So let me go ahead and run this, and I'll show you how this works. So let's come over here, open up this guy, and I'm going to do a gulp serve. And that's because I have to do npm use v8. And then do a gulp serve. And I'm not spending a lot of time on the code here because Stefan's got a good demo right after me, and so I want to make sure I don't take up his time. But my blog post series does explain this quite a bit as well if you're interested. All right, so how does this work? Well, let's go over here. I'm going to add in a new web part. Oh, sorry, it takes a second for it. You'll notice that the build process takes a second or two. So let me jump back over here and make sure it's done. Yep, it's done. Okay. It takes a little bit longer normally with an Angular project. So here we go. We can see that there's our message hello world being passed in. So here I'll change our description here to hello Angular. So you can see here our component is being written out. It is getting the message being passed in. And I can send a message back to my web part as hello SharePoint and send it to the hosting web part that you see was being tagged or is being captured as an event and raised as an alert. Now, that's all fine and good, and you see it work, but there's a problem with this approach. In my opinion, there's a problem with this approach. So what I'm going to do is let me go through and let me hide this, and let me refresh the page again, and let me show you the problem. Let me get this out of the way, and let me find my web part.
It's not a problem, it's a challenge.
It's a challenge. There you go. There is the challenge. 2.8 megs, right? Now, this is going to be a little bit smaller when you deploy it because I'm not doing gzip and compression because it's all coming from my local web server that the gulp serve task fired up. So when you put this inside the Office 365 CLI or your own, the Office 365 CDN, it's going to be smaller, but it's not going to be that much smaller. And why is that? The reason for this is because there's a lot of details to it, but I'll spare you a lot of the details that essentially we can't do this concept called dynamic or ahead of time compilation. The way Angular works is that, let's say the Angular library is a meg big. Well, half of that meg is a compiler that's going to compile your application dynamically at runtime. But one of the things that Angular can do is ahead of time compilation. So it can say, I can build your application and throw away all the parts of Angular that I don't need that your application isn't using and have that as the final outputted bundle. So that means that now the Angular library is half as big because the compiler is gone, and I'm able to do this concept of tree shaking, which gets rid of all the parts of Angular that my app doesn't use. Now, the challenge with that is we can't do that in one project because, well, the SharePoint framework currently uses Webpack 3. The AOT needs Webpack 4. AOT is ahead of time compilation, needs Webpack 4. So let's just say it's not going to work. And if you want to know more details, go read the blog post. But if you come over here, this is a project that I've created using the Angular CLI. If I come look at this Angular module, it looks the exact same as the one I just showed you a second ago. In fact, this one over here, the app component, he looks the exact same as well. The only difference is that his template is in an HTML file and it's the same code. Now, what I did to make my life a little bit easier is in the package.json file, I created a new task here. And what this task does is this is going to first build the project for production, which is going to run the ahead of time compilation. This little setting here just changes how the output files are going to get generated. And then this next step that you see right here is going to say, go take all the files that are created, which is runtime, polyfills, scripts, main.js, which you can see those guys listed right here, main, polyfills, runtime, and scripts. And it says, combine all those into one file and stick those into another folder that's right beside you, which is my SharePoint framework project. So I have this one called ng-hello-world.js. So to run this task, I would say npm space run space SPFx build. Well, what do I have then in my SharePoint framework project? Well, here what I've done is I've created a SharePoint framework project like I normally would create. Nothing special about it. So here you don't see anything special with this guy, except I do have two additional packages that I've included. These are polyfills for browsers that don't support custom elements natively. Here is the JavaScript file that was generated by the Angular compiler, right? And then to use it, notice here, gulp file, no changes. But in the web part itself, all I'm doing is importing that JavaScript file that I just talked about. And then the usage of this, where the rendering method is much cleaner than what you saw just a minute ago when I had to do that platform browser dynamic, because I'm no longer doing a dynamic compilation. It's already done. So now when I run this project and I say nvm use v8, that's just a thing with my machine. You don't have to normally do that. And then I say gulp serve. Now watch this. This is going to be a much better story. And then the story gets even better. And then I'm going to wrap it up and give Stefan at least 10 minutes at the end. All right, so this one, let me go through and open up my dev tools again. So we'll just shrink those down. I'll come over here and I will add my web part to the page. So just again, I can show you everything's still working. Hello, Angular. Over here, hello, Vesa. Ta-da. So there we go. Hello, Vesa. That's working. But here's the best part about it. Check this out. Here is my web part. Hello World web part is now 329K. Now that is significantly smaller than the 2.8 megs we looked at a second ago because I'm doing the ahead of time compilation. But the other piece to this too is that when you gzip this, it'll get down to about 70 or 80K. In my mind, perfectly acceptable for a custom component. But it's going to get even better later this month or next month when the Angular team releases Angular 7, which is going to have a whole new rendering engine. It won't have to require you to change any of your code. And then the bundles that they create are going to be even smaller. Here's one using the new Ivy rendering engine. This is a beta. Check this out. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to first show you the source of what this page looks like. There's nothing fancy with this. I'm simply going through and having a script tag right here, loading in bundle.js. and then I'm using my new hello world component. Notice there's no Angular reference or anything on the page. Now let's refresh the page, and ta-da, gzipped 3.5K. So we should see that demo I just ran, which was about 300K, and I said that it should get down to about 80K when you gzip it. We should see when Angular 7 comes out, that should fall well below 30 or 40K to get even smaller. So with that, I now think that Angular Elements is a decent option for building your Angular-based applications. If you're interested in learning more, put stuff in the chat or go check out my blog post and just drop a comment in the blog post. Ta-da, and Stefan, you got 10 minutes.
Sorry, Stefan, it's going to be crowded, tight for you. But thank you, AC, for this one. Stefan, can you start sharing? And while we're doing this, moving over. So obviously the question we've been having a lot of many times Microsoft been asked the question, why don't you support Angular? Like AC said, we actually do. We do support Angular. We just don't support Angular by default in the Yeoman scaffolding. And that's a completely different discussion. Now, even though we would be supporting the default scaffolding, we would have that size problem, which AC actually showed as well. So obviously we're looking into now, how do we make this happen in the future in the optimal way? But moving from Angular, slightly on Angular topics, to some other frameworks as well, quite often we get a question on why wouldn't, okay, Angular has the size problem potentially, which, well, and Google or Microsoft should fix, and that's a different discussion, and they are. What about handlebars? What about Vue.js? What about the other stuff? Why aren't those actually supported in the Yeoman templates? And that's where Stefan is coming in. Stefan?
Yeah. Do you see my screen?
Yep, all good.
Fine. Okay. So actually, the SPFx Yeoman generator is based on the Yeoman template engine that has been released and is really popular on the web. And this Yeoman generators have some called functionality, which means composability, which basically means you can use whatever generators out there in the world to use in your own generator that you build upon. And what I actually did, I'd like to show you. I created a complete new generator based on the default SPFx SharePoint generator. And let me show you quick this, what it actually does. So the name is pmp/SPFx. And the first thing you notice once it's launched, that we will have a nice logo. So yeah. And the first thing what you have here is this is our PMP community generator. We support currently only handlebars, but there is potentially Vue.js coming out pretty soon. And you can also do the fallback on React.js, Knockout.js, and Node Framework.js. These are the default SPFx generators. In this case, I currently use the handlebar generator. And the next question I get asked is, what libraries do you want to have in my project? So, for example, I want to use jQuery and I want to use PNP.js. This second question also works for the default generator. So when you create, for example, a React project or a Knockout project, then jQuery and PNP.js will be automatically added on top of the default generator. So next question, I can choose two flavors for jQuery, the version 3 or the version 2. I choose here now the version 3. And what you see now is the default dialog of the SPFx generator that asks me some additional things. So I'm currently in a folder that is named community. I'm fine with that. I want to build for the latest SharePoint Online. I use the current folder. I'm not decided yet, and I want to create a web part. Web part is hello world, description. And now it starts the npm install. But what you see up here, so this up here is the default SPFx generator that creates all the assets that we need for our development. But on top of that, I have here updated the SCSS file. I've updated the web part file. I've deployed an additional file, which is called handlebar.hbs, which is a handlebars file. And I copied some configuration for the copy static assets in there. So while this is installing what is already in this project, you see here what you already have seen in Andrew's demo, that we need to have to run in an SPFx project to run handlebars. We have to have the configure webpack here, We have some additional gulp tasks here configured in order to work that this properly work. But what we also did is, for example, when I go here to the web part code and say hello world.ts, this code actually has a little bit changed instead of the default non-framework generator, because I already have imported here the handlebars to make use in my web part from with this framework, and I also load here the template file, which is stored in this folder HPS component. And the whole idea behind handlebars is to have a simple template engine. So what you see actually in here is some property binding and just a simple plain HTML. This will be loaded by the Webpack and then filled up with some data. So I pass in the styles that you can use the default SPFx style sheets in my handlebar templates. And I also push in the description property, and then I compile this template to the actual HTML code and add it to the web part. I guess we are now fine to go with because everything from npm is installed. Yeah, and one thing I would like to show you. So when you take a look at the package.json, you have here the PnP.js installed already. You have the types for jQuery installed. You have handlebars and also jQuery installed, the version 3. So you're fine to start with the development with PnP.js and handlebars. So let me run the code. So I have to go to the debugging console, which is a little bit tricky. Gulp serve. Terminal, sorry. Gulp serve, and now the default starts building my project and launch the browser. So, and I can now add the web part to my page. So let's say hello world. And just because this is just an HTML template, what I can do in here, let's say I want to have, this is really dirty, but I want to have a style and want to have the background color set to pink, for example. I just saved the HPS file. Now you see that the building comes in and automatically the web part with the changed things will be loaded on the page. So what I also can do here is, for example, change the text at pnp/SPFx for handlebars. And I even can edit the properties to hello Gresa. So basically fine to go, and this comes from the need that you have to always configure a lot of things when you want to start a new project, but this Yeoman generator helps you a lot to make things easier. And this is basically how it works. On the backend side, so because this is community driven and you should be able to extend it in future, so we have here the app folder, which is the main generator that you have. And I have here additional generator. For example, this one is for the add-ons JS, for the add-ons, which actually adds the PnP.js and make sure that PnP.js and jQuery, if I have selected, is in there. And in here I have the handlebars, and I'm currently able to have application customizers and web parts set up automatically that I can start right away developing with handlebars or whatever framework we support in future.
Good. So from a timing perspective, I do apologize, Stefan, we didn't give you too much time, but let me reiterate what you were saying. So we are basically announcing an availability of a new open source project underneath the PnP brand, which is the SharePoint framework Yeoman generator. And this is actually extending the out-of-the-box Yeoman generator, which is coming from engineering. We in engineering are looking into making that one potentially an open source at some point, but this is the way we can then right now already provide handlebars or support for PnP.js, and it is actually using the out-of-the-box one under the hoods. So this is just extending the out-of-the-box Yeoman projects. We know that there's certain community members who've been building some of these templates, and we're looking into now, let's say, consolidating that work under one single brand, so to say, or one single project, so that we get handlebars, we get potentially even Angular elements, even though that doesn't quite fit that well on this model, and Vue.js and other frameworks inside of the one simple solution. And then what you can do, you can just run a npm install the SPFx PnP SPFx generator, and that will actually pull down everything what's needed, and it will then basically add new options available when you're creating a project. That's what it means in practice. So you can really easily also use whatever additional JavaScript frameworks you prefer, or if you really want to have some, you're coming up with some new JavaScript framework, you want to provide that to be available for SharePoint framework developers, you can absolutely contribute on this project and provide your framework to be available as one of the options. Cool. And I think that's it for this one. So I'm going to flip the slide back on just for closure. So we did a pretty busy call again. We're kind of debating on 3 demos. Typically in a call is slightly too much, but this time we barely got it in, and maybe we need to definitely concentrate on having 2 in the future. It was me actually changing the agenda again, squeezing in the tenant-wide deployment option. But we don't have a time for Q&A today. If you have any questions related on SharePoint framework or the topics which we went through today, we will have a time for Q&A on the Thursday's SharePoint framework bi-weekly call. So that's on Thursday. If you don't have that recurrent invite in your calendar and you want to have it in your calendar, go to AKMS SPPMP, scroll down on that page. There's an invite available for you to put in your calendar. And then you can ask questions more on these things. Now, I think that's it. We're running out of time. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching this. The video was recorded successfully. No Skype issues this time, so the video is available in YouTube channel within 24 hours. There will be a blog post also in the SharePoint Dev blog, and you can see the social media communications immediately when that happens. But thank you everybody. We'll add all of the links on topics which we went through to that blog post and associate that in the YouTube videos and all of that. And a final thing maybe to say, if there's anybody in this call who wants to contribute and wants to do a live demo in any of these calls, just reach out on the social media and let's see what you contributed, or you want to show your sample from a GitHub, that's absolutely welcome in our future calls as well. But thank you everybody. Thank you AC, thank you Stefan, great demos. We'll be absolutely in touch and keep the feedback coming. Thank you. Bye-bye.